Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people, past, present, and emerging. My name is Jasmin Johnson. I'm the Executive Vice President at PEMANDU Associates, which is an international development consulting firm based out of Malaysia, and we do work in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. PEMANDU is actually an acronym that stands for Performance Management and Delivery Unit. And we're an interesting little outfit because we were once the delivery unit for the government of Malaysia. And we were a full government entity in the Prime Minister's office. But once we successfully concluded our work in 2017, we spun out and became a private entity doing development consulting and nation building work for our own government, but also for other governments. I was also a former advisor to the government of the Solomon Islands, and that's a Pacific connection that I hold very close to my heart, and that's what really inspired me to put together this panel today. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be moderating this conversation on participation in development. Thank you to the organizers for bringing us together. And truly, thank you to each of you for choosing to spend the next 90 minutes with us. I assure you that it will be an interesting 90 minutes. In international development, participation is one of those words that everyone agrees with in principle. But when taken apart, what is its value? Is it enough that everyone gets to an answer regardless of who formulated the question? Do we need to get to a shared question? And can we even hope for a shared answer? If I were to take a meta view on this, I know our panelists will have conflicting views on even some of these questions that I'm about to ask them. But that's why we're here. We're here to unpack a lot of this. So why participation? It seems to be everywhere these days in different words: inclusion, engagement, consultation, co-creation. Our intention today is not to parse these concepts and words apart, but to understand what is that intention? What is that standard or state of being that we are aiming for? And how will we know if we have achieved it? Why do we seek to understand this? Because if we're being honest, in practice, participation is often uneven, symbolic, or tightly controlled. Very often, governments, donors, NGOs, communities, and researchers are all participating, but they are not participating on the same terms. And there's a likely reason for that. Government leaders may be under pressure to quickly deliver results and show measurable results. Donors may emphasize compliance and scaling rapidly. Researchers and evaluators may be concerned with rigor, for example, comparability. And if you get everyone involved, you can't have generalizable results. Community leaders may prioritize relationships because those are the communities that they would be returning to. All of these perspectives are valid, but when they collide, participation can often become a site of tension and conflict. Our panel today is really about these frictions between top-down accountability and bottom-up legitimacy, between the trade-offs between speed and performance, and so on. So we'll explore these questions throughout the life cycle of development, from design to implementation to evaluation. With that, I'd like to introduce you to our panel, our fellow panelists, two of whom are online, and two of whom are, the both of us are here. Michael is here. So we have a hybrid structure today. And so we are very grateful to Finn and friends for helping us navigate that. Let me introduce our panelists first. First, we have Idris Jala. Dato Sri Idris Jala, as he's known in Malaysia, is the president and founder of PEMANDU Associates. He is widely known in Malaysia and various countries as a transformation guru, having led Malaysia's national transformation program from 2009 to 2018, when Malaysia aspired to become a high-income nation by 2020. Idris has achieved some fame when, as its CEO, he turned around the failing Malaysian Airlines in the 90s, as well as brought Shell in East Malaysia and Sri Lanka out of various deep crises that they were facing at the time. He's a private sector guy and lives by the slogan, big fast results. So when he was made minister by our former prime minister and given the task of turning around the Malaysian government, the system prepared for a jolt. And a jolt it had indeed. Since then, he has advised governments in over 30 countries on how to design and deliver major reforms. In this discussion, Idris will draw on these experiences to speak about aligning leadership and managing trade-offs in participatory development, how to keep performance discipline while still opening up space for citizen voice and community input. Our next panelist, Ethel Francis. We're honored to have Ethel with us. She is the former permanent secretary in the Solomon Islands government, community leader, and now a farmer. A successful farmer. Ethel brings a deeply grounded Pacific Islands perspective shaped by decades of working inside government and directly with communities. She has led work on agriculture, informal economy, community-driven initiatives, and has been closely involved in donor-funded programs in the region. Ethel will speak to what participation looks like when it respects local decision-making rhythms, traditional knowledge, collective governance structures, and what happens when government expectations and community expectations pull in different directions. And finally, we have Dr. Michael Woolcock, whom I am so grateful for having traveled all the way from the United States to be with us here today. He is lead social scientist at the World Bank, professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, and one of the co-creators of the PDIA approach, which is very familiar to people in development, the problem-driven iterative adaptation approach. Yeah. So Michael's research focuses on state capability, social institutions, and the evaluations of complex interventions. He has written extensively on participatory projects, conflict dynamics, and how we will actually know whether development projects are working. Today, he'll offer a perspective, amongst other things, on evidence and evaluation as participatory spaces, how methods like outcome harvesting, sense-making, and action research can shape shared ownership of both the questions and the answers. So that's our introduction to our wonderful panelists today. Here's how we'll run the session. So we'll have about 45 minutes to an hour for the panel discussions where I'll ask questions, followed by 30 minutes of audience participation. I'll anchor our discussion today on 3 themes. The first is on power, whose questions and whose answers shape the project. The second theme will be on conflict. How do we navigate these trade-offs and tensions? And the third will be sort of more forward-looking on lessons and inspiration, and if there's even anything generalizable that we can take forward. This is a panel on participation, after all, and we would be remiss if we did not warmly invite your participation. So there is a QR code on the screen. Please take a picture, and you can submit your questions at any time throughout this, and we will keep them. And there will be both a live Q&A as well as a I'll draw from some Slido questions. Okay, so if you've taken a photo of that already, I think we will move on to our panel questions. So our first theme about power, voice, and authorship. So projects often begin with a predefined problem statement, but real meaningful participation frequently emerges when someone outside of the core expert team asks a question and shifts the entire trajectory of a program. So my first question to Idris, you've led transformation efforts at a national scale, from turning around Malaysian Airlines to driving Malaysia's national transformation program. Your work often centers on leadership alignment and discipline in execution. But in many of your reform projects, unexpected insights came not from ministers, but from civil servants, frontline officers, or citizens. Can you share a moment when a question or challenge, perhaps from someone without formal authority, shifted your understanding of the problem and had transformational effect on a project? Over to you, Idris.
Oh, thank you, Jasmin. In the year, I actually have two examples, Jasmin. The first one was in the year 2010, when I was a minister in the government. There was a young man who worked in a multinational company. He vehemently argued with me that the main reason why investments in Malaysia was stalled and much below our target was because of slow and bureaucratic government approval processes. And he argued it until he was completely almost angry with me at the time. But yet I listened to him. I accepted his argument. And the question he raised with me was this: Idris, can we conduct laboratories to speed up all the processes, the approval processes? I went to see our Prime Minister and I convinced him that we should do exactly that. And he asked me, what is a lab? He said, I told him a lab is getting about 500 people from the government and from the private sector to come together in 12 rooms full-time for 8 weeks full-time to deal with the questions, to deal with the issues that are becoming bottlenecks to the investment projects. And if you do the maths, that is a lot of people. 8 weeks multiplied by 5 working days per week, that's equal to 40 working days. And if there are 500 people involved multiplied by 40 days, that's 20,000 man days. So we spend a lot of participation. So if you like, this is mass participation of people to brainstorm, to argue, to solve problems, to deal with conflicts, to agree the way forward. And when we finish the labs, and by the way, we call the labs Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. You stay there for 8 weeks. We told them at the end of the lab, we exhibit all the lab recommendations in booths, and we presented them to the public in what we called an open day. The first open day we conducted there were 13,000 people from the public that came to provide their input and provide a challenge and to the recommendations of the lab, and we incorporated them. And so as a result of that, as we went into the implementation phase, we then developed joint implementation teams from the government as well as the private sector with a delivery unit, which I was leading as a minister. And this whole program, we then went to implement them. The outcome of the lab was extraordinary. There were 131 projects that were agreed by the private sector for them to invest. $406 billion of investment. The total number of jobs, those 131 projects created was 3.3 million jobs. For a country with 28 million population, that's a lot of jobs. And when we looked at this, the effect of this, the contribution to the economic development of our country contributed annually gross national income of about 250 billion US dollars. Then during the implementation, after 5 years of implementing this, the private investment in Malaysia doubled to 11.5% in the subsequent 5 years compared to the 5 years preceding the lab. And the interesting fun fact was, it was the year when Bloomberg put me among the top 10 most influential policymakers in the world. I was quite shocked when I was listed there. I went to see them and I asked them the question, why me and why not Obama? Because President Obama was not on the list. They said to me, Idris, we are actually not impressed with you, but we are impressed with a methodology called the lab and the open day, where you get so much mass participation of people to co-create the ideas. And I want to talk about the second one, which is slightly different. Also in the same year, 2010, an elderly headmistress told me, Idris, there are 3 big excuses in education. The first excuse is, they said the student results, exam results are poor and below expectation because the schools typically blame, number one, lack of world-class curriculum. And number 2, lack of world-class facilities. Number 3, insufficient teacher salaries. Then she added something rather striking. Malaysia has about 10,000 primary and secondary schools, and the top 10% consistently produce excellent student outcomes despite having the same curriculum as the rest, the same facilities, and the same teacher salary. But yet, they produce students year after year that are matched with some of the best schools in the world. Her question was profound. What are these top 10% doing that the others are not doing? Can we get the other schools to do exactly the same? This challenge has fundamentally changed the approach that we took. We studied what the top schools did, and then in a lab, we gathered about 100 over people to brainstorm and figure out how to do this. The recommendations were that we rank all the 10,000 schools every year based on the student outcome, from number 1 to number 10,000. And we publish them so that the public will know which is the best school, which are the worst schools. And we had 7 bands for them. Then we issued a school improvement toolkit based on the best practices of the top 10% of the schools. The biggest of the lever to pull in the school improvement toolkit was structured pedagogy, based on the way those top schools were teaching the students. Then we assigned the headmasters to use the school improvement toolkit to produce their annual improvement plans. Those they then are submitted to the ministry, and so everybody was doing this. It was quite something when we also, part of the recommendation was, we had 70,000 English teachers, and we were rather concerned about the quality of their teaching, their own proficiency in English. So we persuaded the union, and they of course were not happy with it in the beginning, that all 70,000 students or teachers must sit for the Cambridge English placement test. This was a huge debate between the union to calm them down. And we persuaded them, so all 70,000 of them sat for the Cambridge placement test. 70% of them did not pass it. No wonder the students were poor. And so we had to take all of the ones who had failed, the 70%, put them through evening classes and weekend classes to improve their language program proficiency. And so as a result of this, after 4 years of implementing all the works of the lab and in all the 10,000 schools, the student exams results over that period of time improved by 96.6%. It was the single biggest uplift in student outcomes in a very short period of time. So that tells me two things to the question that Jasmin raised. questions. How did these two examples reveal, what do they reveal about power and the voice of reform? It shows that you don't need to hold formal power to influence change. In both cases, it is important to ask the right questions at the point of departure and assigning a full-time team to relentlessly pursue and answer the question to get results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Idris. I think you synthesized that perfectly. The labs and the open days are certainly radical, courageous approaches to getting participation, and I think we will probably have questions on that for you later. Shifting now to Ethel, who joins us from the Solomon Islands. Ethel, you bring a uniquely grounded Pacific lens, one that is shaped by your former experience as the permanent secretary and also as a community leader and farmer. You have spoken in the past about this tension between bureaucratic timelines and requirements and the relational consensus-based pace of communities in the Solomon Islands. And one particularly memorable experience that we had together in the Solomon Islands during COVID was when Ethel was responsible for emergency food relief, balancing donor priorities and community needs in a time of a lot of panic and very, very urgent humanitarian need. So can you share a time when a community member, or perhaps yourself, reframed a project and asked a question that forced everyone to rethink their approach? And what did that moment teach you about whose knowledge is central to the participatory process? Over to you, Ethel.
Thank you so much, Jasmin. It is an honor to join everyone and to share the experiences. I actually have two experiences I want to share around the question that's been posed. But I will start with sharing my experience on what you just mentioned, the food distribution during COVID-19. As you mentioned, it was an emergency situation. And when you are in an emergency, especially the COVID, we all have that experience. It's a matter of life and death. And so the government came and made a decision to close down to try and limit, people's movement. So there was a decision by the COVID-19 committee, which I was a part of. I was a member, to close down the shops, basically just close down the city. No movement, no one is to move. And they made a decision that because they're not allowing people to move, they will have to provide food for everyone in the city. That was a lot of, it was a big task for me and my team. The food distribution was funded by some of the donor partners. Some were coming from the communities, and they brought in whatever they could to support. And two of the things that sort of came to me, and I know very well when I was given that responsibility, is that I have to feed everybody. And I can start because the food were funded by donor partners. I have to be accountable for that. Like in any project development, data is key, is paramount. And so we started by going around and we thought, okay, we're going to feed everyone in Honiara from one end to the other. And you remember in Honiara, you have formal residences, and then you have the squatters, people living outside of Honiara. And that is where the concern really was, in feeding those people who don't have money, who rely on everyday sale. And it was heartbreaking because then we have women who rely, they sell on the street. They go to the market and they sell to feed their family. So they depend on everyday sale. So the first day lockdown, we found some of the women. I sent my team to just do an observation around the area, and some of them were actually crying because they don't know what to feed their children. But then the challenge for me was, I can give you the food, but then I have to report and I have to know who is actually getting this. So we went to the city council to get the information as to how many number of houses in Honiara and what are the estimate of people who live in those houses. There was no data. We went to the census report. We could not even get the data that we needed. So I went back to the committee and I said, I have a big challenge here. I don't know how many people, what are the houses here. In Honiara, those of you who've been here, we cannot even number our streets. We don't have any numbering system for residences. So you basically have no idea of actually getting some, data to actually know how many people are living in different parts of Honiara. So that was the first challenge that I have to face with. Remember, I was trying to get the data to know how many people I will be feeding, but at the same time, I have to do it immediately because there is a close down. So we went to the town council. They don't have any data. So I sat down with my team, and Jasmin was there. She was a blessing indeed, because she manages the data collection and the verification and everything. So I kind of handed over the ugly part of that to her. But we sat together and we thought, how are we going to get the information that we need? So we thought about how the communities organize themselves. Within Honiara, we can go to the formal residencies within Honiara and we go house to house. But in the squatters where we don't even know how many houses are there, we have to really think about a system where we can use that will be consistent. So whatever data that we get is verifiable and we can even trust. That when I report to the donors and even the government on who actually get the support, there are some data that we can. So we have to come up with a system where we can use and confidently say, these are the household and these are the total number of people that we fed. So we sat with our team and we discussed the fact that even the town council don't have any. So we go into the ward and then we have to go to communities and get community leaders. We have to use the institutions within the community that they rely on. We have to get the churches to also participate, community leaders, church leaders. And so that is the system that we get. They give us the numbers of people they know in the community, and they get this household to give us how many people in the household. And then we get back to them to actually verify the names of people that they were giving it. Some people, they want more racing, so they inflated the number of people in their household. So we have to get the leaders within those places to support us to verify that numbers. It was very ugly because while we were trying to sort out the data, we have to also sort out the food. But people were outside. They were so hungry that they were coming and they were knocking on the gate. We were threatened. So we decided that even though there was an emergency, we have to make sure that when we make our report, there is some truth in the report that we produce and we give. To me, as someone who was supervising that was paramount to me. I don't want to come and say we fed 200,000 people, but even behind my mind, I don't even know where the 200 come from. So we worked day and night. We had to stay up late. We had different groups. Jasmin, we divided into groups. Jasmin was supervising the data collection. I was supervising, kind of look over everything. We had a team who were putting all the food together. We also had to manage volunteers. We asked for volunteers. Remember during the COVID, we also, beside the food, we had to manage the volunteers that were coming. We have to get the medical team to test the volunteers that were coming in. Some of them, they were disqualified and we didn't get the number of people that we wanted. So we had to work overnight to actually get more people and get the food ready to be distributed. One thing that came, that came out of that, and I think it's also important to us in all aspects in project development and reporting and even accountability, is making sure that we have data that we can rely on. And that was the huge part of the food distribution that we manage. I have to report back to the COVID-19, to the Prime Minister, and say, this is the number of people that we fed, and we have to trust the numbers that we gave ourselves. We have to report back to the donor partners, and we say, that is the number of people that you have supported during the COVID-19 lockdown. So that is my experience. Accountability, you have to have the data that you can rely on. To me, that was key in this food distribution. The other experience I want to touch on, I think, on community, seeing that I was asked to speak around the community and how we manage that. I want to touch on one of the, it's on education. I was asked to be part of a team. I was engaged to be part of a team that came in to sort of take on a very challenging situation as well. The New Zealand government were giving funding to community, to schools around the countries. So they had this experience through reports of earlier support to the schools around the country, that the money that they gave to the schools, they sent through provincial government, but only 30% of it get to the school. So when the New Zealand government came in, they thought, let's just give the funding directly to the schools. So they gave the funding, and they asked all the schools to put up their bank account, and then they give them the money and ask the teachers, the principal and them to manage the money. But at the end of the project, what they found out is there was huge mismanagement of the funds. So after the New Zealand funding, there was a report that they wrote, and they wrote about the huge mismanagement of the funding, because there was no system to actually check how the money was used. They kind of trusted that if the money goes to the school, and they trusted the system that are set up in the school, they have school board, and they should oversee what the principals and the school management are doing with the money. So when we came in, we saw the report, and we thought we have to have some system in place. So we came, and I was tasked with an international consultant to develop a grant disbursement system, so we can track the money and we can also hold people accountable. So when we came in, we designed a system where remember before that, the board and the principal were the accountable people. So when we came, we decided that we have to have a system where we can penalize whoever is the final person, the person that makes the final decision as to how the money will be spent. So we made a decision that in the system that we are going to implement, we are going to have the principal as the sole decision maker. The principal will decide on the money, not the school board and then the principal. So we decided on that because there is already a system that is in place in the government system that you can discipline the principal, but you cannot discipline a school board if they mismanage the money. So when we went in and tried to implement that system, there was a lot of backlash from the school board, because they didn't trust the school principal. They didn't trust the system. So I was tasked with the responsibility of going around the country and training everyone on their different responsibilities. So we had the school board to oversee, the principal, the only person to decide on the money, but they report to the board and report to the ministry on how they use the money. So that system actually worked. When we were training the principal, some of them, very funny experiences. When we had the first training, we brought the principal and we laid out to them the system. One of the principals fainted in the conference because he realized that we will catch him. And sure we did. He misused the money. So I went around the country and brought all the principals together with the school board, and we explained the system to them. So the school board was saying, you are letting one person to decide on the money. We have no control over that. But my job was to convince them that, yeah, he is the only sole person to decide on the money. But the good thing about that is we can penalize that person. We cannot penalize the school board. So there is a system that is already in place where we can discipline the principal if there is mismanagement of money. So it took years to actually get through that because there were conflicts in the community. There were situations where the school board are community leaders in their own community. So we had situations where they had to chase the principal away because they could not understand the system and what we had in place. So I was tasked to actually manage the conflict between the two parties. The system is still used to today. I think to me it was a success. So this was around the year 2000 up to 2006 and led the project. So it was funded by the European Union, and it was a success because now we have some level of accountability, and we kind of work through the community so they can understand what is the level of accountability and what are the penalties that we have in the system where we can penalize when there is mismanagement of money. So those are the two experiences where I can share. And I think it's very important, just a piece on before I close, is in project development, it's very, very important that we understand the context in which the project will work in. Very, very important. I can share a lot around that when I am given or if there is a question is asked around that, because I have a lot of experience around that. But in getting to the community for Solomon Islands, it is very important that we do understand and participation, getting a voice, but also understand what are the different institutions within the community. How do community behave, and what are the expectations of the projects and the support that are coming to them? So I will stop there, Jasmin, and I'm looking forward to hear more and also respond to any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ethel. Thank you so much. I think you've really brought to life in two separate instances all the conflicting priorities and questions that different parties have. So Michael, shifting over to you, when people have such different priorities and, are asking different questions, how do we get to any semblance of a shared answer?
I know the answer, and I'll tell everybody by the end of it. No, the essence of so many of these questions are that they're everywhere all the time, actually. And somehow we learn to figure out. But when we do this organizationally, then it becomes much harder. And I'll just give some thoughts on how we might navigate that. And the last time I was here in Canberra speaking was when we launched our book, Building State Capability, which was the centerpiece of which was this response to these kind of challenges as manifest in this acronym, problem-driven iterative adaptation. And I'll come back to that perhaps later on. But just as an opening statement regarding just how pervasive this is, we are here in Canberra, right? Why are we in Canberra? Why does Canberra even exist? Right? Because in the early parts of the 20th century, Sydney and Brisbane, upon being existing now in a federated state that was free of colonial impositions, fought each other over which city was going to be the capital city. And neither could resolve their dispute, so we end up here. We end up in a little circle around ourselves now called the Australian Capital Territory, so that we're not part of New South Wales and some other state can't then sort of have excessive jurisdictional power over us. So the very land we're sitting in, the city that we are in, is a product of a dispute resolved not in a particularly pretty way at the time, but over time has normalized itself such that extent we all think it's entirely normal and natural to be in a city called Canberra. When if we understood it historically, we'd see Canberra, like every other place, more or less has its story about how it came to exist and how it comes to be who it is, and who is us and who is them. And that story probably has a lot of contention and conflict built into it. Right? So this room is a function of that. Within this room, there are people who represent various different organizations, who bring very different sensibilities and different priorities, different legitimacies that they would respect versus others for how we engage with complex, contested questions. And part of what I've been doing with my career is just trying to sort of like, how do we tame that? How do we order it in some sort of way that we can engage with it in a more reasoned and respectful kind of way, rather than just doubling down on our own particular preferred modality of trying to get to yes. So rather than just getting to yes, I'd like to use the phrase now sort of getting to whelm, right? What is whelm? It's somewhere between being overwhelmed and underwhelmed, right? I don't know, I've tried to look this up once. Is whelm an actual word? Like how we got overwhelmed, everybody understands that word, but when you take the over part off, is whelm still a word? I don't know, whatever, right? But getting to whelm, let's get to whelm. How do we do that? Well, if I knew the right answer and anyone else did, we would have, as humans, figured this out a long time ago. But the reason that human life is so contested and so complicated is because these kinds of problems aren't actually solvable in a E equals MC squared kind of way. There will not ever be an award given for someone who cracks the code of how we all get along with each other, right? That is the human problem from the get-go, and it will always be. Our grandkids will be trying to wrestle with their own version of this, and so here we are in 2025 as development people trying to get our heads around how do we engage with these. So the kind of work that I do sort of breaks it down into these three different categories, which I'll just loosely and briefly describe. They obviously are more complicated than I'm going to make them, but for pedagogical purposes in the moment, I'll describe them as such. The first is just what are the types of problems that we are dealing with, right? At the Kennedy School, we distinguish between technical problems and adaptive problems. Technical problems can be solved by 10 smart people in a room. Adaptive problems are forever problems that just require lots and lots of human interaction and engagement. There is no answer. If there was, we would already have figured it out. It has to be curated and devised even from the get-go in order to be able to do that kind of work. So if the problem that we face is inflation, for example, we do not need to have a whole bunch of community consultations held across Australia. We're quite happy for the Reserve Bank to sit around with its 10 top macro financial people. They'll run a big Greek model through all the data they've got, and they'll decide and emerge after their meeting Delphic-like with a statement, what interest rates shall raise by a quarter of a percentage point, right? And some of us would have enormous sort of awe for that kind of power, right? The problem they face is resolved by raising interest rates on the dial, a quarter of a percentage point, so that, wow, this thing called inflation can be tamed, right? Now, most of us in this room are not macro finance kind of people. We don't work with tools, data sets, and everything else that would enable us to turn a dial by a quarter of a point and watch beautiful things happen in the world. We have to dig much deeper into the adaptive problem space, wherein there isn't an answer. There is only the answer you jointly create in that particular moment, in that particular context, to deal with a very specific kind of challenge that you face. And those are the vastly more complicated kinds of problems that you face. If you've seen the movie The Martian, the character played by Matt Damon comes back, the conquering hero, having survived his time out in Mars, and the adoring young recruits that are just joining NASA sort of plying him with all these questions, and they ask him at the end of the movie, so how did you survive? How did you make it through your time out there on Mars all by yourself? Right? If you've seen the movie, you know his answer was, well, I solved one problem, and then I solved the next one, and the one after that. And I knew that if I solved enough problems, I would eventually come back to Earth. Right? Perfect encapsulation of the PDA approach to thinking about things. Right? It's just, you can't solve the big problem of, I need to get back to Earth. Right? I'm going to solve the problem I face right now. And if I get good at solving that particular problem, maybe I'll get better at solving a slightly more complicated one. And if I keep doing that, then eventually this big meta problem that I face of trying to get back to Earth or deal with how we resolve conflict in our village, all of that might actually start to be more likely to be achieved. So this big space of what are the different types of problems that we face? And ones that are in this adaptive space have a much more strong case for being where the participatory stuff has to be baked into how things are done, because that's the only way those kinds of problems get solved. We don't need it for these technical problems, for brain surgery, for a whole bunch of other stuff. We're very happy to let experts make those kinds of decisions. But for the hardest ones that humans have ever faced, we are the problem, we have to be the solution. And figuring out how to do that is the magic of what enables collective action in human societies to actually happen. The second sort of set of problems is just what are the different constituent groups that are part of this, understood not so much in demographics or geographics or professional category, but in my way of thinking, just more epistemically, to put it more formally, what counts as a question and what counts as an answer for the particular group that you're dealing with, right? If you were to go to an astronomy seminar at Harvard, for example, within the astronomy department, very particular understanding of what counts as a question and what counts as an answer. If we were to hang out with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters out in the middle of nowhere in Australia and look up at the sky at night, very different understanding of what counts as a question and what counts as an answer for understanding what we're looking at when we see this wonderland of stars in the cosmology above us. And how did we get here? How do we become who we are? Right? Those are just wildly different understandings about what counts as a question and what counts as an answer. In my little world, right, I work in the research department of the World Bank. I'm the only sociologist out of 70 economists. I'm the only sociologist that they've ever hired ever, right? I'm the only non-economist they've ever hired ever, right? So even my little world, what counts as a question and what counts as an answer, I at least know how my fellow brothers and sisters in econ land understand what counts as a question and what counts as an answer. I understand what counts as a question and what counts as an answer for me is different enough to justify my existence, right? Otherwise, I'd just be a bad economist. But I want to think I'm bringing a different, not just a different body and a different skin color and a different gender or anything else to the table. I'm bringing a different headspace, a member of a different kind of epistemic community, right? And our world, once you look at it, in this room, in this city, is stacked with people who have very different, a part of very different epistemic communities. You have on certain issues, whether it's religion versus science or anything else, you have a very different understanding of what counts as a question in this instance, on this particular issue, and what counts as an answer. Right? The third different realm, I just think, is how do we manage relentless trade-offs? Right? All the issues, the complex issues that we face are inherently going to create really positive outcomes for some people, be indifferent for others, and potentially deeply consequential for other kinds of groups. If I'm a town planner and I use my eminent domain powers to be able to put bulldozers through people's houses in order to be able to build a nice new highway through that, right? That's the cost-benefit analysis of the project as a whole might be overwhelmingly positive, but if you happen to be residents of the houses that get bulldozed in order for that particular project to go ahead, you've got to have an awful lot of capacity to deal with the cost, with the trade-offs involved of that, because you happen to reside in the place where the trade-offs are really harsh and really consequential. Ramp that up a bit to putting a highway through a rainforest or over the top of a sacred burial ground of ancient ancestors, then you're in a world where there aren't so much trade-offs in the arbitraging kind of sense, whereas we'll negotiate a price between what you think I'm worth and what you think we're worth, and we'll sort of negotiate down to that. Once we're into the world of negotiating with the ancestors about whether it's okay to pave paradise and put up a parking lot, right? Just since someone else since Idris used Hotel California, or I'll put in a different song. That's not a world where you can stick a few extra zeros on the contract and sort of try and buy people off by saying, well, if we just give you 100 times what we're currently offering you, will that be okay? Right? For the 10 people who have ancient ancestrals and ties to that particular land, it's immolation. Right? That's what I'm going to do in order to protect that particular space. You cannot buy me off with particular money. What counts as a question, what counts as an answer in this particular space is so wildly orthogonal to the space you want me to be in, that there's no point in negotiating on those particular terms. We have to create a whole different space for that negotiation, that thing to go forward. There is no mathematical problem, no Greek model we can come up with, no game theoretic approach we can come up with this. It's just how are the humans going to sit around and make that particular discussion and negotiation? A few years ago, I was in a wonderful meeting in Canada where, for various different reasons, I'm still not quite sure, I was invited. But the issue was, this particular group of Canadians representing everyone from Indigenous communities right through to government officials, through to social workers and others. How do we spend $26 billion in reparations money that the Canadian government is now, after a lot of agitation and a lot of decades long of campaigning, finally created as a pot of money to be able to begin this process of trying to atone for a century's worth of stripping Indigenous people of their languages, of their culture, of their religions, in order to make them good Canadians, right? Shifting their entire identities, right? Okay, so the meeting was like this. We've got $26 billion to spend, but by the way, we've only got 8 months to figure out how to spend this. We will literally not have any money given to us if we can't figure this out. So the clock is ticking super loud right from the get-go. And it was one of the best meetings I've ever been to, just because it was truly a room with adults in it, where it was no grandstanding. It wasn't my evidence is better than yours, or I'm going to yell louder than you because I care about this more than you do. It is how do we enter into the different spaces of the different constituent groups in this particular moment where we can figure out who is actually going to get money, who's going to get more than other people. And if I'm a social worker whose job it is to go into some of these communities, how am I simultaneously going to decide that that family gets, say, $10,000, this group gets $50,000? Oh, and by the way, I've just noticed that there's an overt instances of familial neglect going on in this family over here because there's bruises on the wife and the kids are being malnourished because they're not being fed properly. How bad has that situation got to be for me to now take that child away from their parents and make them a ward of the state because of a rule that says my job is to protect the welfare of children that are being neglected? So the next 3 hours, we had discussion around one word, which is what counts as neglect historically and to this day. Where's the data set I can get to solve that problem? Nowhere, right? Where is it? In the heads of the people in this room. The answer we get is the answer we negotiate over the next few months. And by the way, that clock over the above our head is ticking super loud because if we haven't figured this out in 8 months, that money goes. Who wants to be the 28-year-old first-year graduate of a social work program whose job it is to go into Saskatchewan in the middle of February with their left hand giving out $50,000, $20,000 checks to people in the name of reparations money because of the awfulness imposed upon you by a century of the government's actions? And with my right hand, I'm going to take that child away from the family because they're actually being neglected by their parents right now. Who thinks that's a fun job to have, right? You're sitting in an airplane next to somebody and they ask you what you do. How do you explain what it is you actually do in that situation? Right? Those are the trade-offs you got to make. One of the best discussions I ever had was in Vanuatu with a village elder who was talking about what education in his village was like. Right? And it wasn't, paradoxically, a lament about my kids aren't learning properly, the teacher never shows up for work, teacher complains about not getting paid enough. It was all a story about what a very successful education was doing to his daughter, right? And he was a village elder. He was looking around. It was a room not unlike this, except it was full with 50 men who are the village elders on this particular community, right? And this guy stands up and says, "Michael, great to have you here. Thanks so much. We're really appreciative of the World Bank's funding and the support they give to our education system here. But let me just tell you what's happening as a result of the otherwise very good education that my daughter is receiving and that I want her to receive, I should stress," he said. The reality is, unfortunately, that as my daughter has learnt more how to read and write, she looks around at this village, at the elders in this room. All of us are over 50 years old, but none of us can read and write. She thinks we're idiots. She thinks we're fools. She has no respect for us anymore. They don't respect the decisions that our council makes because she thinks she's smarter than me now because she can read and I can't. What's going to happen to her? She learns now a language of ambition about maximizing her own potential. That's what she's learning in school. So what's she going to do when she finishes high school? Is she going to stay around in this village? I don't think so. She's probably going to go to Port Vila and live in work probably in the city where she thinks she's going to fulfill her potential. She's learning that language. But if she goes to live in Port Vila, she's probably going to marry a boy from Port Vila eventually, which means she won't be from here anymore. She'll be she'll now reside in the community in Port Vila. They speak a different language down there. So she's going to forget how she should speak to us here. And then she will have children, and those children will be born in that particular place. And because we have a very strong cultural identity that where you're born is super important, she won't be part of our group anymore. So I just want to thank you for ensuring that my daughter gets educated. I just want you to know that it's blowing our whole community apart. Thanks for being here. Kind of silence in the room. So that's a sort of a quintessential Schumpeterian sort of creative destruction moment, right? We've done, this wasn't failure, right? He wasn't lamenting. What we often lament is that, geez, the kids are showing up, they're wasting their time in school because they're not learning anything, No, kids learning great. What's the consequences of that? Whole fundamental reorienting of how she makes sense of the world, what she expects for herself, what she wants to be in life, how she fulfills her potential, how she lives her life in a different place, how she marries, whether she has kids or not. All of that fundamentally re-altering how the world goes. So those are the kind of spaces that we've got to fill. For how do we deal with these? When we encounter problems that are highly adaptive, when we have very different understandings of what counts as a question and what counts as an answer, and when the trade-offs involved are relentless and they're going to affect certain people very, very consequentially, even if the net effect, and according to some nice, beautiful statistical analysis, says that the cost-benefit ratios are so overwhelmingly in support of this that we can still move forward. So I think that's my sort of entry point into starting to think about how we tame all this chaos. It's not to be overwhelmed by it, not to be underwhelmed and think we too much, we can't do anything. Right? We should be able to do something about that. We should be able to create a space where we recognize and do the work that it takes to identify what kinds of problems we are addressing, that we figure out by looking at the different, not just the different interest groups or the different advocacy groups or the different organizations that are in the room, we think about what counts as a question and what counts as an answer for these people. And where we know or can discern that there's likely to be pretty different understandings of what counts as a neglect and what counts as an answer for neglect. What counts as good education and what doesn't. What counts as good farming practices and what doesn't. What counts as good birthing strategies and what doesn't. Right? All of us with fancy degrees want us to be able to say that we've got the answer for that. And we feel very self-confident and very bold and bright when we can walk in to say, I know what the answer to that is. I can improve your yields on your crops. I can ensure that your kids will learn stuff they would never learn anywhere other way. The consequences for all of that are often so profound for people's lives that we just have to have this more structured and sensitive commitment to how we do this work of negotiation and talking and working our way towards a space where the answers we get are good enough for enough people to be able to live with them, right? We do that all the time with elections, when we apply for jobs, when we apply for grants. There are people who wanted to be at this conference that are not here because their proposals weren't accepted. We have legitimacy built into how these decisions get made that more or less we live with when that they turn out not to be beneficial for us. how do we create a development process wherein all these really difficult trade-offs are recognized from the get-go, and an honest sort of efforts are made to do that, even or especially when we have to also honor one of the big trade-offs, like the ticking clock for my Canadian friends, to do the stuff we need to do in development. We are under these very particular kinds of expectations with regards to how we're going to achieve what we're going to achieve and what we're going to achieve by when. And if we don't have good ways of even addressing those kinds of questions, then we just set expectations that are going to be so far out of alignment with what's actually possible. And then we will find ourselves needing to do very harsh kinds of decision-making that themselves might be violations of the principles that we started with. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that particular space. But my example from Canada, and the examples from Vanuatu and others that we can discuss later if we want, are all about how space was created and protected for these really difficult questions to be resolved, and letting people, trusting people to recognize that they're not just different, phenotypically different. They look different, they speak differently, they speak different languages, they worship different gods. Right? Think about it more in terms of what counts as a question, what counts as an answer for these particular people. How can we get the framing of our problems into a space where we can find ways for negotiating with each other to get those problems at levels we can then start to manage them? And then how can we figure out how to recognize that whatever outcome we come up with, it's going to benefit some people, indifferent to others, and it's probably going to be pretty harmful for other people. How do we imbue that change-making process with enough legitimacy to bear the tension and the pressure of all of that and not let it blow up? That's always been the problem for us as humans. It was when they biblically wrote the story of the Tower of Babel, when we're still thinking about these questions now, what our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be worrying about in their own way too. This is our moment in our professional lives. We're trying to wrestle with these challenges. I hope we can do a better job than we often do, than just than invoking our own legitimacy and our own stature by virtue of our education, about the fancy organizations we work for as the basis for moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. So much rich stuff there. You've left me certainly with more questions than answers. And have inspired me to kind of start with the Q&A, I think, before we go to our conclusion. So as a reminder, the Slido is up. Feel free to enter your questions online. But maybe I'll start with one here, and then the roving microphone can probably go around the room. So the first question here, mass participation can be susceptible to power dynamics with only some perspectives prioritized. How did Dr. Idris and his team manage power dynamics? So the first question goes to Idris, who's online with us. Please, Idris.
Yeah, there are two things that we did to deal with that. The first one was we told everyone that the private sector can present projects to us, but we will only pick the projects on top of the list that are fulfilling three criteria. Number one, the project must have huge investment from the private sector. So the total investments that the private sector is going to put there is the first criteria. Number two, the number of jobs that project is going to create. We wanted that. And third, the contribution of that project to the gross national income of the country. For clarity, the way we calculated the contribution to gross national income, we took the EBITDA of the project plus employee compensation. So we told everybody, you can come with 1,000 projects, but we will rank them on the basis of these three items. And the ones that are on top of the list are the ones that will be prioritized. Because the problem was a lot of people came with projects that I consider as state capture. They were not really interested in the projects. They just were interested in government incentive and subsidies. They wanted land, all of those things. So we had to make the priorities crystal clear right from the beginning. This was how we were going to do it. The second approach that was used was my team. We had facilitators in the room, so that when you have 500 people locked in 12 rooms, you don't want the conversation to be dominated by one or two people who are rather boisterous in voicing their input. So what you want to do is, people like Jasmin was a facilitator, and there were many people in my team, they were facilitating it, making sure that the voices of everyone in the room is properly heard, using very skillful facilitation techniques that was needed. And that's really how we did it. At the end of it all, there was another thing that we told them. Every idea that is put on the table will be subjected to public scrutiny at the open day. So if you came with a project that does not pass the test of public scrutiny at the open day, that is a no go as well. So in many sense, the approach that we took was, it was not possible for someone to do a state capture. That means bring their projects there and pet project and pass all those tests. That's how we dealt with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Does anyone want to own up to asking that question so we can thank you? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, great question. And now we'll pass the mic around the room. If you could introduce yourselves so that we know whom we're learning from. If you could also direct your question to a particular panelist or to all if you'd like. Any questions? Yes. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Alexandra here from Samoa Post. I'm just interested to understand Dr. Idris, just from a do no harm perspective. Did you experience any negative consequences in publishing the school rankings and the requirements for the teachers to take the exams? Just keen to understand in terms of
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Andrea. We absolutely got robust resistance from wanting to even do that. I mean, the union and the teachers were almost up in arms. They said, I've been teaching English for the last 15 to 20 years. How dare you ask me to sit for the English proficiency test? And so that was the first problem. And then, indeed, you're right. There were a lot of resistance from the schools for us to publish the full ranking of the schools so that the whole world knows it. And so the way we navigated was the following. On the first one, the resistance from the union and the teachers to get the 70,000 English teachers to sit for the test. When we dealt with them, we talked to them very much in line with the PDIA approach and the adaptive approach. We listened to them. This is what they told us. If any one of them fail the test, are you going to sack them? Yes or no? The answer is we are not going to sack them because they are going to be given more chances to go and improve their English. And we told them after 3 test trials, if you fail it, we will then ask you to focus on different subjects because some of them are doing dual subjects. Some are doing history at the same time doing English. So just focus on doing history, not English. The second one was, for those who fail, are you going to remove the English allowance? Because the students, the teachers in Malaysia that teach English, they were given a special allowance called the English Teachers Allowance. And we told them, no, we're not going to remove that. And after we had lots of discussions with the union on the 2 conditions that was granted, then they said, okay, we can get everyone to sit for the test. On the second one, the publishing, when we negotiated with the union, or the teachers rather, the Teachers Association, we came with a compromise. We informed every school of the exact ranked position of that school amongst the 10,000. But what we publish in the public document, we categorize the schools into bands. So band 1 means the top performing school, and band 7 means the lowest performing school. So that you don't know exactly which school is number 10,000. But you know that school is among the bottom if they belong to the band 7. And that was a compromise that was agreed between us and them, and they accepted that. The unions and the teachers association accepted that as a compromise. But you realize that it took us altogether 1 month to just hammer an agreement and consensus around a compromise. Because if you didn't come with a way how to deal with this, in the end, we didn't do it. But it was so important for us to do this because our view was, if you put the position of the school clearly to the public, you then put the pressure on the principal and the teachers to do their job. This is accountability. Results is what count. And you can't dance around the results because it's the same curriculum, it's the same teacher salary, it's the same facilities. And so therefore you have to do your job, teaching the students a lot better. And so that was how we dealt with it. Thanks for the question, Alexandria.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to give my questions to all of the panelists. My name is Aditya and I am from Indonesia. I just want the reflections or the further insights about the participatory design on the development projects. It is because there are a lot of frameworks on participatory design like human-centered design, sense-making, noticing, experimenting, and so on. However, there are a lot of people or parties that claim that this approach is implementing co-design, whether it is only asking several questions to the beneficiaries of the project, for the example, or the community only involved in certain activities. My questions is when we can say that the project or the interventions that been done is considered as participatory. Is there any clear border on what participatory means, or is there like clear theory to answer that? Yeah, just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael, would you like to take that on?
I co-authored a whole book on this issue actually in Indonesia, so I should be able to give a nice, beautiful answer, shouldn't I? Well, I will stay with Indonesia. In the World Bank, coinciding extremely fortuitously with when I started at the World Bank in the late 90s, there was the first of the attempts that are now more frequently being done all around the world around this category of interventions once called CDD, community-driven development. That was pioneered in Indonesia through the Kecamatan Development Program and evolved and changed its name many times and is now the Village Law. But in that particular situation, the participatory rule, as it were, was one of subsidiarity, like trying to get the decision-making at the right level at which having a participatory approach was actually the right response to dealing with this, for which in this particular case it was, we can't do everything. We being the public officials, we're trying to reestablish the functionalities of our local governments in a post-autocratic era. We're trying to deal with a major financial crisis and trying to provide basic resourcing and job opportunities to people. Rather than centrally determine what that's all going to look like, we will get money sent at a level that the community level, that being sort of the sub-regional, sub-national area. And then giving block grants to those particular communities and then letting within those particular legal jurisdictional spaces, opportunities for people and villagers themselves to submit proposals bounded by certain rules about you can't get the money to build a mosque, for example, but you can to build a community centre or a new health facility or a small bridge across a small river. That array of possibilities wasn't determined ex ante by experts who decided they knew better than villagers about what their problems were. We're saying let's trust that if we can create and protect a space for negotiating, which was the first time ever in Indonesia that those kinds of public negotiations had been held, because autocracies don't do that. Autocracies are autocracies. They tell you what to do. This was the first attempt at being able to try and bring in, at the right level, enough people, but it'll simultaneously create a space where you're going to get winners and you're going to get losers. A lot of poor villagers spent a lot of time putting together a proposal. For many of them, the rest of your peers decided that this wasn't such a great proposal. This one was better. Some then had implementers in that space then took it into their own hands, I think rightfully, to say, well, the rules say we have to have winners and losers, but culturally, we don't work like that. Right? If people have actually put a lot of time and effort into doing something, and even if it's a pretty crappy proposal, frankly, they shouldn't at least go away with something. Right? So they created a graded scale. Some people got a lot and some people got a little, but at least they didn't get nothing. And that was their solution to this problem of legitimacy and fairness, but still honouring the fact that we had to have priorities as we decided, which means by definition, some people are going to be high and some are going to be low, and some are going to get more and some are going to get less. But all of that having its legitimacy because it came from a community. So the answer to the question is the participation was at that particular moment in that particular space decided at the level at which the decision-making could be sufficiently decentralized, but not too decentralized so that it could be captured by scary village leaders who would decide that, well, I'll just take all that money, thank you very much, and build a nice road up to my hut or my house. Right? There had to be some levels of accountability and make it big enough and visual enough publicly so that there could be media coverage of these issues. There could be a requirement that the money allocated be posted in a public space in a village so everybody can see who got what and for what reasons. I'm just trying to be as transparent and accountable as possible. So the way that the level, there isn't an optimality in general. It's context specific and issue specific and trade-off specific such that all those three domains that I mentioned come together to imbue it with legitimacy. Does that work in a E equals MC squared formulaic? If you do this in Afghanistan, it will work? No, it can work, right? Which is really different from it does work. Just as diplomacy can work, just as marriage counseling can work, just as social work can work. It doesn't mean it does work, it can work. And the mystery and the magic is that it sometimes works and there's no formulaic prediction up front about where exactly it will work, but it can. And once we're in a space where we're working where it can work, but it doesn't work uniformly, predictably, compellingly, huge amounts of the work we do in development is in that kind of space. But in our protectedness and our insecurities and our desperate need to show that we're smart enough and justify all the nice degrees we have, we want it to be as technical as possible because then only us can do it. Right? But if we allow a lot of that decision-making to be devolved down again, you deal with the outcome, and that requires lots of whelm. Right? Not overwhelmed, not underwhelmed, lots of whelm to get it good enough. And we have to live with that. Because if it's not that, then it's put back into the bottle of I know better than other people. The most expedient way of doing that is for me to decide and you just to take what you get. That might be okay in some places and some issues, like inflation issues, as I mentioned, but for most of the stuff that we all in this room care about as individuals, as citizens, as parents, as partners, right? So much of that is all negotiated and all relational, and that's how we should think about not all aspects of development, but certain key aspects of it, which our prevailing apparatus just does not give us the space to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. I will direct the next question to Ethel. This comes from online. How can we encourage more government adoption of a participatory approach, given that the government sometimes does not engage? That's such a great question. Does anyone want to own up to asking it so we can thank you? It's an excellent question. But over to you, Ethel. How can, as a former government official, how can we encourage the government to take a more participatory approach?
Thank you so much, Jasmin, and thank you for that question. I will only speak on the context of our situation here in the government. And I over the years of my experience working in evaluating projects and programs, like we kind of come to the end of the project and you see whether the project has achieved something. And in my role in actually designing project, one of the things that I have actually come to realize is that going to communities, these are communities that have been there for a long time, and some of the communities has had experience of people coming in and getting their views on, like people going in and the initial stages of project where you gather the community participation. And they already have these experiences of people going into the community, ask questions, and they go and they never come back. That was one of the things that we found when we went around to do the evaluation is the willingness of the community to participate because they have had that experience. Some of them come to think that, they just come and want to get information because some of them, they came before and they never come back. On those different levels where you need people to participate, we have to ensure that we really know that when we get to the community, there is something that will benefit them. We need to explain to them the kind of benefit that they need to get. And that will encourage their participation. One of the other things that's very challenging when it comes to encouraging participation is that you go around to communities that have different cultures that kind of influence the way they open up to participate, right? Maybe we have communities where people are they're very quiet. When you set them in a kind of a formal, even if it's like a small meeting, they cannot open up to share. So you have to be very strategic in how you need to get them to participate. And that's where understanding the culture, understanding the context, understanding the expectation of people is very, very important. So I will share that in some of in my other role where we had to train board to understand their role as only supervisors, but not only approval of the funds, is to really get them to understand what are the implications of their participations. Right. And then the other thing that we did is when we went to other places, they're not happy, but they're not willing to share their views. So because I understand their kind of character, I have to go and get some of them, during lunchtime or during tea time or even just evening stroll with the community. I want to hear. I usually go and just hear the general stories, like you give yourself time so that you can just hear what they want to share, because some of them, they don't want to share during formal discussions. In the informal setting where you just sit down, lunch, you go to them and you just say, what are your thoughts? Or you kind of have a discussion that kind of lead them to share their views. So we have to be very smart in the different ways that we have to get people to participate and share their views or their thoughts.
Thank you. That leaves us so much to think about, and given our time constraints, we are sort of at the end of this panel, but there are so many excellent questions here. I encourage you to please put them in. I will share them offline with our panelists. Michael and I are here for the rest of the conference. Please come and speak to us. You know, I really wish that I could get to all these questions, but I think I need to wrap up now. So I think our panelists have given us so many concrete examples of where speed and inclusion kind of pull apart, where evidence and lived experience tell different stories. And perhaps the value actually lies in these tensions because they force us to recognize that participation is sort of a series of negotiated choices, if I could paraphrase Michael. So as you leave this room, I just want to offer 3 reflective questions that you can perhaps take with you going forward. Number 1, what assumptions about community capability or evidence or leadership do I bring into a project without realizing it? Number 2, where in my project is power concentrated and how might that be shifting how I think about things? And number 3, what spaces and practices allow for meaningful participation, and which ones unintentionally close it off? So these are not questions that we answer once, but I believe these are questions we live with and answer throughout our careers in international development. So with that, please join me in thanking our panelists, both online and here. And thank you so much to each one of you for sharing this time with us. Have a great rest of the conference.